Hello and welcome to another How to Code Well web chat. My name is Peter Fisher and today we're going to be discussing what to expect in your first ever web development job. This applies to anybody who is perhaps a back-end developer, a front-end developer, a DBA, any kind of web development job. And it's the first ever job that you've had. So perhaps you've applied to a lot of positions and you've finally decided on the one that you want. You've taken the interview, you've been accepted, and there you go. Now I'm going to be talking from my own perspective, and I've had 4 different web development jobs in my full-time web developer's career. I'm now a freelancer, so I'm now working for myself. So I'm going to be talking from my own experiences, and I do appreciate that everyone's experiences is very different. Now the first thing that I did when I first walked in, was I was given my local environment and I needed to set that up. Basically, it was a computer that I needed to install a lot of software on. I needed to download all of the websites, download all the databases and so forth, get into all the access credentials, SSH keys and blah, blah, blah. Basically, I needed to set up my own local working environment. Now, everyone's local environment is very different. Okay, some like to do things in a different way. Sometimes it's prescribed. Sometimes you have to follow the guidelines that they've set out. Sometimes the guidelines are simply guidelines and you can waver from the path if you have another way of doing it or a better way of doing it. Now, if you have a better way to set up your system than what the documentation says, then you should mention that. You should say that because you might be given the opportunity to update that documentation. That means that other people, other developers who come on board will be reading the documentation that you've edited. This shows the employer that you're interested in developing and integrating with the company. Now, depending on the systems that you're working with, that whole process of setting up your development environment, reading all the documentations might take a long time. And in my experience, the bigger the company that you're working for, the longer it takes to set everything up because there's lots of procedures to follow. There's lots of documentation to read and so forth. I'm not saying for a minute that documentation is bad. I'm not saying that processes and procedures are bad, but it's often my experience that the bigger the company, the more of those that you have to deal with. And that's perfectly fine. Because if you don't follow those and you do something else, then you might bugger up your system. However, if you do something else and it's better than what is preferred on the documentation, then like I said, you need to mention that and see if you can put that into the documentation yourself. Now, after that's done, once you've got all of that set up, you're probably going to be meeting a lot of other developers and also a lot of other departments. So be prepared for meetings. And again, like I said, this is very different depending on the size and the scale of the company. The smaller the company, the less people you need to talk to, of course. The bigger the company, the more people you need to talk to. You might have to talk to the HR department. You might have to talk to the finance department. You might have to talk to the graphics designers, the team leaders, the QA team leaders, all of that kind of stuff, and be introduced to all of those people. Now, the bigger the company, the more bombarded you might be. Don't worry if you forget everybody's name. That's perfectly natural. It certainly happened to me on lots of occasions. So don't worry too much if you're nervous and you're basically walking around just shaking everyone's hands, okay? After that, what you'll probably be invited to is several social gatherings, meetups, lunches, and so forth. You want to try and go to as many of those as possible because you'll be finding out what they are like in a social perspective and they will be doing the same to you. It's more of a relaxed sort of meeting, if you will. Once all of those things are out the way, once all of the legwork is done, once your system is set up, once you've met all of the other people and all of your ducks are in a row, then you start looking at the code. Now, this could be several days, it could possibly be several weeks, depending on all of the stuff that you've had to do before. The first piece of code that you're going to be looking at is a legacy code. Legacy code is basically code that's been around for a very long time. The reason why you're probably going to be on legacy code rather than the code that's, the latest and greatest code is that they still need to see whether you're good enough for the role. You'll be in a probational period, okay? So you'll be on what's called maintenance. You're maintaining an existing system. They'll give you a series of bugs that you'll have to go through and fix, okay? And you're probably going to be referring to documentation that is very old. Now, don't be afraid if some of the documentation doesn't make sense or doesn't sync with the actual code. In my experience, a lot of the documentation doesn't actually marry very well with the actual code. It needs to be updated and tweaked. And it's your opportunity to do that. Again, that's a very good thing to show to your employer, to show that you're interested, invested in the company, and you want to progress with the actual setting up of the systems, fixing the bugs, and so forth. Also, if you see anything that you're not too happy with, make a mental note of that and bring it to your team leader. Now, your team leader is someone who probably sat on your interview and has probably given you access to your local development machine. It's the person that you're going to be reporting to. You would have met your team leader in the interview. You can go to them with some suggestions, some ideas. You can say, look, this documentation doesn't actually make any sense. I've tried to do this, but this has happened. If that is a genuine issue, then the documentation needs to be updated. That is your opportunity to do so. Documentation might be written in Markdown. It could be written in PDF format, okay? And you might have access to actually update that documentation. So see that as an opportunity. Now, don't get too disheartened with the legacy code. Legacy code means that the company has been around for a long time and everything runs on legacy code. Once you've shown your mettle, once you've shown how good you are, the team leaders will start to consider you on actual projects, actual features that are new to the systems that they're working on. However, this might not happen straight away. This probably won't happen for at least the first couple of months, at least until you're out of your probational period, because they are trying to see and review all of the code that you've done in the maintenance stuff. They know that the legacy code is probably a box of frogs. It's probably full of a lot of messy, dirty code, and they want to see how you cope with that. Also, the legacy code is basically the foundation of the company's systems. They know that it works and it has worked for a long time. So any bugs introduced to the legacy code probably will be off of the back of any updates that you've done. Now, like I said, it's very difficult to put a timeline on this stuff. It's very difficult to say this will happen in your first week, this will happen in your second week, and so forth. Every company is very different. Every system is very different. It all depends really on the scale of the company and what the company is actually trying to achieve. If it's a very small company, if it's like 5 people or less, then there might be more flexibility, more room to maneuver, and so forth. If it's a larger company, then there's probably going to be more processes, more guidelines, more documentation to read. But certainly do read it, do understand it, and if there is anything that you don't understand, flag it up and talk to your team leader or other developers around you. Now, as I said right at the start of this video, this is my own experience. Everyone's experience is slightly different. I'll certainly be interested to hear about your experiences in the comments section below. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe. I do a web chat like this every week, every Friday. On a Tuesday, I do a tutorial. So far, I've covered PHP, MySQL, Linux, Docker, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all of that kind of stuff. There's plenty more that I'm going to be working on in the coming months. Thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll speak to you again soon. Cheers. Bye.